Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Today is going to be my August wrap-up. I was able to get through 7 different works this month, which is a little bit more than I normally do, although 2 of them were novellas, so that's probably why. The first 2 things I read were actually the novellas, and they were Thorns and Tangles and Swords and Shadows by P.T. Hylton. He has a series called the Zane Halloway, which is a set of 6 novellas that he's publishing. He's published the first 2. The third actually came out on August 31st, and I'm really excited to download that and read it. Follows Zane Halloway, who is an assassin, and his apprentice Lily. The first one I would only give 3 stars, but everything that I didn't like about it was simply because it was a novella and not a book. There was nothing wrong with it. It was a pretty interesting world, especially considering that he only had 90 pages to kind of form it. And the first one was more of an introduction into the world and kind of a little brief background on a couple of the characters. And the second one, Swords and Shadows, I enjoyed a lot more. I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars. It really kind of hooked me into the series. I can't wait to finish it. I also like the idea of doing it as a series of novellas. I think that's very interesting. And I really cannot say this enough, but if you are not reading P.T. Hylton, you are missing out. He's a good author. Then I read or listened to Monster by Frank Peretti. This is the first Frank Peretti I've read in a while, but he's an awesome author. This book follows Reed and Becca Shelton, who are a younger married couple. And Becca is someone who stutters pretty severely, and it's gotten to the point where she basically tries to avoid social situations because she's very self-conscious of her stutter. And Reed decides that they need to go out in the wilderness to kind of help her boost her confidence. And they're supposed to be meeting up with a couple of friends of theirs, Sing and Cap, and they're going to meet up with a wilderness expert guide dude, whatever. Well, they get out there, and the first night they're supposed to meet with their wilderness guide, and then Sing and Cap are coming the next day. Well, they can't find their wilderness guide, so they decide that he decided to meet Sing and Cap and meet them out the next day. So they decide to camp out in the wilderness, and it's a very freaky night. They hear some sounds, rustling, they realize something else is out there. They start panicking and try and run away from it, and eventually come across the dead body of the wilderness expert, Randy, that they were supposed to be meeting. They panic even further, and Beck ends up falling off of like a small waterfall, like 8-10 feet, and ends up being knocked unconscious. Reed is separated from her. Reed is found the next morning, and they start a search for Becca, and they cannot find her. They can also not find the body of Randy that Reed claims that they saw. So half of this book is Reed trying to convince people that he didn't actually kill his wife and that what he says actually happened, and kind of the search effort to find someone out in the middle of nowhere. The other part of the story is Becca's story, and you find out that she was basically taken in by a group of Bigfoots, Sasquatches, I should say. And I know at the word Sasquatch or Bigfoot, a lot of people are kind of going to roll their eyes and lose interest. Keep in mind, this is a fiction book. But if you have any interest in Sasquatch or Bigfoot at all, this is a very interesting book. It was pretty well researched. I have a friend who's actually a believer, and I've heard a lot of the theories and around their behaviors and mentalities and so on, and Peretti really did his research. This is like suspense thriller, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very interesting because in this book, Beck has a stutter. In The Choosing by Rachelle Dekker, which is also a book I read, one of the characters, Remco, has a stutter. And I'm pretty sure I read a 3rd book recently that had a character that had a stutter. And to me, I think it's a very interesting ploy to use for a character. I also think it's kind of nice to see that represented. I stutter somewhat. It's really not noticeable now, but when I was younger, it was pretty noticeable. And so it's always nice to have something that you struggle with represented. This book also has a cover-up going on in the process, and you're trying to figure out who's a part of that and who on the search team they can trust, who's actually trying to find Becca, and who's just trying to sweep everything under the rug because they kind of made some mistakes and they could potentially have their neck on the line for it. I don't want to say too much because it is a very good storyline, and you think you know what's going on, and then at the very last you realize that you were wrong and that something else is going on. And Peretti is very good at doing that as an author. I would very much suggest it, unless you are someone who's going to be ticked off because Peretti is a Christian author and the villains in this novel are the evolutionist-leaning academia. If that is going to really piss you off, I wouldn't suggest this book. If you can take it simply as that, which is fiction, I think you could still really enjoy it, but just throwing that out there, I don't want anyone coming back being pissed at me because I recommended a book where an evolutionist was the bad guy. I personally don't think it's a big deal, but that's my own belief system. The next book that I read, as I just mentioned, is The Choosing by Rachelle Dekker. I actually have a review video already posted with my wife. She also read the book, so I'll link that down below, but it's basically set in a dystopian universe where society is very male-leaning. The world was basically falling apart, and someone decided to save them, and he said that God had spoken and given him the Veritas, which is based heavily on the Bible, but it was something that God only gave him alone, and he's kind of asserted authority through this. And in this, women are judged on whether or not a man will choose them or not, which is basically proposed to him. And if you are not chosen, then you're basically a cast-off from society. No one will talk to you or look at you, and you're basically forced to perform jobs that no one else in the society wants to. The main character, Carrington, is not chosen, even though she was considered attractive and smart and was expected to be chosen. And it deals with her trying to accept the fact that her entire life she was basically told that not being chosen was the worst thing in life. And then all of a sudden that happens, and then she's torn away from her family, told she's never going to see them again, and then basically told to be happy with her lot in life. Along the way, she's exposed to this rebellion, kind of, even though it's not really a rebellion, but there's this guy, Aaron, who preaches a message that your worth comes from being a human being, not what you can or cannot do, or who chooses to choose you or not. So she's struggling with wanting to accept this message, but also trying to accept her lot in life. There's also a serial killer abducting lints, which are what unchosen women are called in this society, and killing them kind of rather horribly. This book is Rachelle Dekker's first book. She is the eldest daughter of Ted Dekker, who I mentioned on this channel before. And this book was really good. I really enjoyed it. I would give it like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It had some romance. It had some dystopian. It kind of had some horror elements to it. It was pretty suspenseful. It was pretty well written. The story really sucked you in. For my complete thoughts, feel free to click on the link below and watch my wife and I explain what we thought about it. Then I read Zoo by James Patterson. I actually have a review video of this film. I don't think I'll have had time to upload it by the time I upload this video, but as soon as I do, I'll go back and link it below. Zoo is, technically it's by James Patterson and Michael Ledwidge. I'd never read any James Patterson before, and honestly didn't think I ever would, but I had a friend suggest this book and kind of give me the plot synopsis, and it sounded really interesting. This book follows Oz Jackson, who was going to, I think, Cambridge? I might have that wrong, but he was going to a very prestigious university, getting his degree in, I think, genetics, although I might be wrong about that. I am terribly sorry. I've read a couple of books since then. But he then started realizing that animal aggression towards human was increasing, and developed this hack, which is human-animal conflict theory, and basically he got laughed out of the university, and he's devoted his life and his meager resources to proving this. The book starts with him getting a call from a friend of his from Africa saying that they've had lions acting rather mysteriously, so he hops on a plane, goes to Africa, and the story really picks up from there. It takes place over a 5-year time, kind of a first-person perspective from Oz's perspective, as he's trying to, first of all, convince everyone that this is a real thing, and then once that finally happens, convince people the right way to handle it. This book was very fast-paced. It definitely sucked you in. It kind of kept you on the edge of your seat. It was definitely a plot-driven novel and not a character-driven novel, but I still very much enjoyed it. I would give this like an 8.5 out of 10 stars. I don't know if I'll ever read another James Patterson again, but if someone told me that he had another book that was similar to Zoo, I would definitely read it. I would also recommend, if you're into animals or the idea of something happening to cause society to fall apart, I'd recommend this book. They're also basing a TV series of the same name based on this book. Haven't watched it yet, but I'm trying to figure out how I can do that because, like I said, the book was pretty good. Then I read Star Wars Maul Lockdown by Joe Schreiber. I was pleasantly surprised. Lockdown is more of like a space opera / horror. It follows Darth Maul, of course, who is sent undercover by Darth Sidious to infiltrate this prison called Cog Hive 7, which it reminded me a little bit of the movie Death Race. In the setup is a private prison run by people who then pit the contestants to deathmatch style fights and take bets off of it. The woman who is running it, Siddiqui Blur, has a twin brother who's a very good computer programmer who's created this algorithm that picks fighters, basically allows them to bet on the underdog, knowing that the underdog will probably win. Sidious sent Maul there to actually get in contact with an arms dealer that is rumored to work out of Cog Hive 7, even though no one's really even for sure that he exists. And the plot gets a little bit more complicated because at this point in the timeline, Darth Plagueis, or Darth Sidious's master, is still alive, and Plagueis actually told Sidious to send Maul to kill this arms dealer. Well, Sidious took that and then modified the orders a little bit, telling Maul that he wanted to broker a deal between supposed arms dealers, Iram Sadiq, and have him give a nuclear weapon to a fringe group to basically start war on the outer edges. And so at this point in the novel, they're still trying to get the separatist movement going. Darth Maul comes into the prison and has a series of death matches against other different inmates, and Sidious instructed him that he's not supposed to use the Force. I actually really liked, because let's be real, a Force user going against non-Force users just isn't fair, so the majority of the book, Maul's not using his powers. Made it really interesting. The thing that I liked most about this book is it had kind of a very eerie setting, and you were never really for sure what was going on. Maul, to me, is just a fun character to read books from his perspective. He's definitely a badass, and I don't know, I like reading books from his perspective. I've read, I think this is my second or third book from Darth Maul's perspective, and I've enjoyed all of them. I do have to say, I think that this would be my favorite. Joe Schreiber was able to include like the character of Siddiqui Blur, who was a very striking character. She's a lot different from kind of your standard character. I really liked her. There was also a Mun from the banking clan, Slither, who was, again, a very like striking character. He did a good job of creating characters that weren't essential to the novel, but were still very interesting and served their purpose very well. It was kind of creepy. There was a couple of twists you didn't see coming. I really enjoyed it. I would give it, man, I feel like I gave a lot of books this rating, but again, it'd be about 8.5 stars. I was pleasantly surprised with it. I think Joe Schreiber is a good example of someone who he's not, and I don't mean this as an insult, but he's not like a brilliant author, but he also does understand what he's good at and works within it very well. I was very impressed by this book. He was able to write characters that I really liked and a plot that kept me guessing, and I actually listened to this on audiobook, and the person reading the audiobook did a good job. It was just a very creepy vibe, which I very much enjoyed. So yeah, if you're a Star Wars fan and you've not read Lockdown by Joe Schreiber, I would definitely suggest it. And the last book that I read in the month of August was Armada by Ernest Cline. I have a full review and discussion video already up that I will link below. This was definitely the most disappointing. Well, this was the only disappointment of the month, but it was also the most disappointing. I would only give this one like a 4.5 out of 10 stars. Feel free to watch the review video to kind of get my complete thoughts on it. This book follows Zach Lightman, who's a high school senior, kind of set in present day. His father died when he was 1, and he's grown up idolizing the idea of his father, and his dad was kind of an 80s nerd, so he's now a present day nerd, and his favorite game is Armada, which is a game where you're fighting off an alien invasion. And early on in the book, Zach discovers that the game is actually based on reality, and that the government set it up as a training program to train civilians to help fight this incoming alien invasion. And the book covers the alien invasion. The best part of this book was the 80s references. I didn't feel there was a whole lot positive after that. The story to me was a little bit lacking. It was just so-so. I felt that Cline kind of took the easy way out on this book and didn't really push himself, and just kind of put down an easy story that I felt like I'd read 100 times before. There was no surprises. The characters were very lacking. I didn't feel attached to any of them. Several characters died, and you're just like, oh, you know, that's kind of cool. There were a couple of moments where Cline almost made me feel for a character, but they were very brief, and he just couldn't quite. He came close, but didn't quite do it for me. So yeah, that was definitely the most disappointing book I read this month. And yeah, I was hoping for a lot more from Cline, but that didn't happen. That was my reading month. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below and let me know what you read this month, what you liked, if you've read anything similar to me. Especially if you happen to reading the same books that I did. I'd like to know what your thoughts were, or what your thoughts were on my thoughts. You can also feel free to like or subscribe. I would definitely appreciate that. And I will see you all next time. Bye.